Welcome to Manager Tools. This week, Salary Discussion's 2x2 Matrix Tool, Part 1. The questions this cast answers are, how do I decide on raises and bonuses? Should someone get a raise only because of their performance? How do I tell my directs about their raises?
To those of you down under, we will be in Melbourne, Australia, the week of April 22nd for our public conferences, which means this is the opportune time to coordinate your on-site training needs with us, since most of the overseas travel costs are going to get absorbed by the public event. In other words, you'll save money. So contact Maggie, her email address, maggie@manager-tools.com, to discuss how we can deliver an effective manager, effective communicator, or effective hiring manager to your team. If you got a group of 15 or more, it's far more cost-effective for us to come directly to you. So take advantage of our once-a-year visit to your part of the globe. It is that time of year again.
Yeah. People are thinking Christmas, and we are thinking, we're thinking performance reviews.
Yeah, exactly. And from the standpoint of the direct, folks, there are a couple of things that the performance review entails, essentially. Now, the first is the performance evaluation itself, how they did over the course of the last year. The second bit is the salary discussion. And managers notoriously underprepare for the performance part and then struggle having salary discussions because what they're saying they have no basis in because they don't have enough information about the performance bit of it. And therefore, managers worry about the tension between what every direct wants, a raise, and what they can actually give them.
Mm-hmm. And in all of the preparation, too many managers forget that the salary discussion is not only about employee performance and how they did over the course of the year, it's also about the performance of the organization, corporate performance.
Mm-hmm.
Today, and over the course of this total podcast, which we believe will be a few parts, we will share a simple tool to help you craft your salary conversations during performance reviews.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. All right. So the outline of today's cast. First, we're going to discuss compensation is determined by two factors, not one. Then we'll introduce the 2x2 compensation matrix, followed by an explanation of those 4 parts of the matrix. The first cell, B1, individuals exceed and corporate meets targets. Then cell A1, individual exceeds and corporation does not meet targets. Then cell B2, individual fails to meet and corporate meets its targets, followed by the last one, the saddest one, frankly. Cell A2, individual fails and corporation fails as well.
So we're going to start with the premise here, most important thing that we're going to keep in mind as we go through this discussion. We're going to help you make decisions. All of these decisions are based upon the idea that compensation is determined by 2 factors, not one.
Mm-hmm.
Most managers struggle being effective at preparing and delivering performance reviews. You could end this struggle very easily for yourself if you're listening. If you follow our guidance about preparing and writing and delivering reviews, of course, I can tell you from our guidance and having used our guidance for, lots of years, it works. It becomes routine. You get used to. It's funny, in my brain, and this is partially because I lived in Phoenix for so long. And in Phoenix, I guess the heat lets off. There's not a lot of triggers, though, that the holidays are coming, that like fall and Christmas and those things are coming. So for me, my brain, the kind of rhythm of my work, the first indication that the holidays are coming is that I start thinking about performance reviews because I have in my calendar a recurring yearly.
Happy holidays, Kate.
I know.
That's the least exciting part of the holidays, I've got to say, in my opinion.
Totally true. So it's just funny. You can solve this problem for yourself. And
and we know how.
Yes, and we've taught it
out
to you. Yeah.
Now, I will also say, the topic we're discussing today is a heavy one. I mean, there are a lot of details. We're going to talk through a 2x2 matrix, and you're listening to us on a podcast. Welcome. Which means we will not have any visual devices to walk through or point out to you the bits of this 2x2 matrix. There's going to be some complexity here. You may want to consider becoming a licensee in order to gain access to these show notes. It'll just be so much easier to follow along. You can join us at learningfromkate.com and become a licensee. And there will be links to podcasts like the one Kate just talked about, how to prepare, write, and deliver your reviews, as well as this podcast, as well as the show notes and all the other things associated with it. So we're going to refer to many podcasts while we go through this, that being one of them, and becoming a licensee will allow you the ability to catch up on all the things that you've missed.
Yeah, and to look at the 2x2 matrix, which might make it a lot easier to
totally
understand us trying to talk you through a 2D square situation. Another reason that managers struggle is because they know that they haven't done the hard work of giving regular feedback throughout the year. And so we'll really either have to deliver a review that's vague and unuseful, or surprise their direct with new information that they feel they must put in the performance review and haven't verbally necessarily addressed with the team member.
That's exactly it. The failure here being to deliver regular feedback. And it's a huge reason why performance reviews are hated by employees. And if you've been with us for any length of time, you'll know we're talking about regular feedback. Often to the people on your team, we are the biggest advocates of regular feedback. Most managers, though, think that employees hate reviews because they dislike the fact that they're not getting the raises they deserve. And that's not entirely true. Employees dislike performance discussions because it's not supported by previous feedback. And then they hate the compensation discussion because we managers don't do a good enough job explaining that more than just individual performance is considered in compensation decisions. So, all that to say, if you want employees to hate performance reviews less, give more feedback more often throughout the course of the year, and then prepare yourself, as we're going to help you do with this podcast, for having those discussions at the end of the year.
Yeah, constant performance communication that's really clear, so your direct knows what you mean, which I think is where a lot of us fall short. Managers feel that they are talking about performance all the time.
Yeah.
Communication is what the listener does. If your directs don't feel that you're talking about their performance constantly, at the end of the year, they'll feel like the weight of the performance review is immense because of the fact that, suddenly they're talking about my performance, where you as a manager may feel that you've been talking about it all year. And I'm not going to argue that. I do think managers feel they're talking about performance all year long in a lot of cases, and it doesn't come across that way.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like they're receiving feedback. You may be delivering it, but they're not receiving it. And that matters. That absolutely matters. And this brings to mind for me, Kate, another podcast called No Surprise Reviews.
Yes.
Which again talks heavily about this topic. I mean, the fact that if you give a bunch of feedback throughout the course of the year, when you get to this conversation, which let's face it, isn't overly fun and enjoyable for the average individual, it comes, or the conversation occurs with much less concern, hesitation, because there's no surprise. It's
right.
Here, let me just quickly tell you about all the things you already knew.
Yeah. And part of the reason, again, that this is hard for people, or that, as you said, it's not fun for the average person, is because it's a lot of work and you only do it once a year, and it's extra stuff on top of what may already be a very busy time of year for you. That's why we recommend spreading it out. We have a lot of guidance about how to do that. And all of this focus close to the end of the year on personal and individual performance sometimes, I think, causes people to forget the second piece. And the second factor in compensation decisions.
Yeah.
The second factor here, not helpful. The second factor in compensation decisions is organizational performance.
Yeah.
To get a raise, right? It has to be. To get a raise, it's not enough for an employee to exceed standards.
No.
The company must also meet or exceed its financial targets.
Yes, exactly.
It's a fundamental truth, and too many managers don't know it.
Exactly. So what ends up happening when a manager has a top performer working for them, but the company doesn't do well that year, the manager goes into this conversation, the performance review at the end of the year, dreading the delivery of bad news. And then the manager blames the company for being stingy, though not necessarily to the direct during the discussion. They don't say it, but that's kind of where it comes from. Kind of like, this is not my fault. This is their fault. And managers worry about how this high-performing direct will act. And therefore, it changes the way they deliver the news. They end up delivering it more poorly because they don't feel as though they're justified in saying to a top performer in a poor year, you can't have a raise this year.
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole cycle of events. It is.
Yeah. And we have to think about this from a financial perspective. If the company didn't exceed, how could we then have extra money to offer to people?
Yeah. Where are we getting our money from?
Right. Where might that be coming from?
Yeah.
Okay. So the manager is concerned that the direct will take this information in a less than excited way. And so they deliver things in a less than excited way. And y'all, this is mistaken thinking because, again, it takes both factors, individual and corporate performance, to justify a raise or raises in general, frankly. Remember, when a manager is delivering a performance review, they're doing so on behalf of the company. And we said many times, the very essence of role power is the ability and responsibility to speak for the company. When we're delivering reviews, it's as if the CEO herself is delivering the review and the information. And the CEO is responsible for corporate performance. And in this place of power that we've been granted, we as managers are obligated to deliver that news to the directs, whether it's good or bad.
Exactly. It's our job to be the voice of the CEO, but to our individual directs. Now, typically, in larger firms, these broader compensation decisions are made by senior leadership, usually in really close coordination with HR. And again, if you tune into our website when this podcast is released, you'll see at the bottom of the podcast page in other podcasts referred to, we've got some previous guidance in a podcast called Compensation Discussions During Performance Reviews. And we talked about the common technique of leaders giving lower level managers buckets of compensation increases. Now, in that guidance, we recommend that as a manager, if you're provided this bucket, you apply them differentially. That is, if, for instance, the corporate performance justified a 3% raise generally, an effective manager might give her best performer a 5% raise and pay for it by giving a lower performer a smaller raise or potentially no raise at all, depending on how large that bucket is.
Mm-hmm. If you're getting a bucket, and if you're in this situation, it's important to note that when senior leaders are making these decisions, they're basing them almost entirely on corporate performance.
Mm-hmm.
Those decisions are happening at a level at which the main consideration is corporate performance.
Yeah,
How much available funds are there to increase the compensation of the people in the organization? And that's based on how well did the organization do. Then, as it kind of trickles down through the org chart, if you can imagine it that way, they rely on individual managers to deliver that news, even when, as is often the case, they do not provide specific guidance about how to deliver the corporate performance part of all managers' compensation discussion during performance reviews.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know where the break in this learning is. I'm not certain where the gap happens between the lower level managers who know that they're getting buckets and the upper level managers who aren't explaining, hey, this is where those buckets come from and how and why and et cetera. There seems to be like a mid-level breach in communication about this.
Lack of communication. It's not unusual. I mean, in my experience, Kate, for us to work with those frontline managers and tell them things that are their responsibility and they be astounded that it's their responsibility to do that. The elimination of non-useful work, astounded I could possibly delegate something to the floor. That's not my job. It's actually your job. No one else is going to do it for you. And this is another one of those circumstances. Due to lack of clear communication, managers who in large organizations like this are given these buckets have a tendency to take that bucket and divide it equally among the members of the team. To be clear, what we're suggesting here is you don't approach it as though you've got this bucket, which should be divided by, let's call it 7 if you have 7 people, divided by 7. Rather, you take the corporate performance number, your total dollar amount, right? Your total bucket, and you, on behalf of the organization, make those individual performance decisions, thereby giving different amounts of raise, in this case, to different employees based upon what they personally did over the course of the last year. Now, that's at larger companies.
Yeah, and that's like a weighted system. That's another way to think about that. We've said differential, and that's helpful. Another way that I often think of it is like weighted.
Yeah, exactly. Now, at smaller companies, it's different.
Yeah.
Right? At smaller companies, even though at large companies, there's, in my experience, not a ton of guidance, you're going to get even less guidance generally at smaller companies. You might be given a bucket, and you won't be told very much about corporate performance at all. Typically, though, the smaller firm, or the smaller the firm, the closer you are to the information you can gather directly about the overall performance of the organization to help you craft some of your verbiage. You're going to do a little bit more work if you're at a small company.
February 5th, we're hosting an online effective communicator course for anyone who wants to increase their skills in communication. The course is over Zoom. We focus on DISC and how to identify techniques to be better understood, better heard, communicate better. If you're interested, please join us February 5th, starting at 1 p.m. Eastern. Sign up online at manager-tools.com/training. If you're just now learning this, y'all, if this is a new bit of information for you about how this stuff kind of works, do not be shocked. It's honestly not something they teach always. And so you might not know it, and that's okay. Now you do. And we're going to help you now to figure out how to consider individual and corporate performance, and then how that influences decisions and communication around compensation performance reviews. Which brings us to the 2x2 compensation matrix.
Yeah.
Which we see as the simplest way to both determine and communicate someone's future compensation. This 2x2 compensation matrix. And dream with us. The matrix itself is dead simple. Imagine a blank 2x2 matrix, which is basically a 2-row, 2-column table. It's a 4-box. It's a box with 4 boxes inside of it. It's a box with 4
boxes in it.
Yep. The left vertical axis helps you plot individual performance in the rows. The top horizontal axis helps you plot corporate performance in columns.
Exactly. Now, it's pretty clear. I mean, everybody, if you're listening to this podcast now, grab a piece of paper, jot these things down. It'll be so much more helpful having this in front of you, or again, become a licensee so you can see the 2x2 matrix. The 2x2 matrix, again, as Kate said, is dead simple. But what it does, the reason it's dead simple is it makes clear the interaction of the two drivers of compensation and gives you clear guidance about how future compensation decisions can be made and communicated. So on the left or vertical scale, in terms of, again, get your paper, get your pen out, you'll label the first row as exceeded expectations. The second row is then labeled met or didn't exceed expectations. High performer compensation will be determined in the top row. Lower performers will be determined in the second or bottom row of your 2x2 matrix. Now, on the top or horizontal axis, on the top or horizontal axis, you'll label the left column as did not meet targets and the right as met or exceeded targets. And when I say targets in this case, sorry, I should be more clear. I mean organizational targets.
Corporate goals.
Corporate goals. Exactly. So what you're going to end up with is a 2x2 matrix with 4 boxes to fill. And the boxes are filled with the results of the intersection of the two variables that are found along the top or left axis, individual and corporate performance, each with 2 states relative to their respective matrix.
When you look then at the 4 cells or boxes that represent the intersection of the rows and columns, it looks like this. Top right, so top row, right column, block cell B1. Employee exceeds expectations and company meets or exceeds expectations. Top performer in a good year to be a top performer.
Yeah.
That's the top row, right column. Top left, which is top row, left column. Block cell A1. Employee exceeds expectations, but company does not meet expectations. So top performer who won't get the payoff she might be hoping for. There could be a special bonus in truly unique accomplishments, but it won't be big because the company can't afford it. Bottom right. So bottom row, right column, block cell B2. Employee meets expectations or fails to meet expectations, but company meets or exceeds its targets. It could have been a great year. Had your employee performed well, but they didn't and will miss out on a nice increase. Perhaps there will be a generalized corporate performance bonus, and that's out of your control. Bottom left, which brings us to the bottom row, left column, block or cell A2. Employee meets or fails to meet expectations, and the company fails to meet targets. No raise, no bonus. Both because performance doesn't justify either, and there's no money to pay for it anyway.
Exactly. Going back to what you said earlier, where are we getting this money from? There is none. Good.
Yeah. If you didn't exceed the market, then there's no extra money.
Yeah.
The money to create raises and bonuses comes from extra money.
Yeah.
And we don't have
any in this case. Exactly.
In the bottom left.
Left. Exactly. Now, folks, there are two things worth noting at this point. First, note that there's a slight difference in the manner of separation of the levels of performance between the individual and corporate perspectives. We'll get to that shortly. And there's the potential to expand your use of the matrix to a 3x2 instance, though we don't recommend it.
But we do recommend becoming a licensee because drawing this is...
Oh, yes. Already.
Luck.
I know, exactly.
Okay. Regarding the subtly different criteria for separating individual and organizational performance, the dividing line between the two performance outcomes are different. The dividing line for individual performance is between meeting and exceeding expectations, standards. Put differently, for individual performance, as it relates to future compensation, meeting standards is basically the same as not meeting them.
Mm-hmm.
That is not trivial. Let's think about that for a second.
Yeah, meeting expectations equals not meeting expectations.
For this analysis.
In this analysis,
yes.
Exactly.
On the other hand, when it comes to performance for the organization, the dividing line is between meeting and not meeting targets. So for organizational performance, meeting and exceeding are together in one column, separating them from not meeting targets in the other column.
Exactly. So the question that I'm sure that's in people's minds right now is, okay, so but why? Why are we doing this way? Because individuals and organizations are different entities. And the measuring systems of those two different entities are therefore different. The determination of results are different. The impact of those results on individuals and the system itself are, again, different. It's all just so different. It would be super weird if we applied the exact same demarcation principles to those two evaluations, which are completely different.
Yeah, it would be silly to take a system that applies to a one-person organism,
exactly.
and then also apply it to a, for example, 1,000-person organism.
Exactly.
And further, okay, so when a company sets a target, it's essentially creating an agreement with its employees. If you meet these targets, you will be rewarded. Targets are designed to motivate.
Yeah, they're not meant to be, this is what we're going to achieve. It's meant to be, this is what we could achieve. Yeah.
And there's, I think, to some extent, an assumption that we'll make a certain amount and we would like to make our target.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And in fact, a good deal of executive discussions about organizational target setting is about how far out the target can be, if you want to think of it that way, and still be believable/achievable in the eyes of the employees. How far out can we set the goalposts before they believe they cannot kick it through the uprights?
Which causes an impact, right? They're like, well, I can't meet it anyway. It's got to be achievable.
Yes. And it's so funny because there are years, funny story, I just watched the Beanie Baby Bubble movie.
Okay, yeah, sure.
About the business that created Thai toys, which created Beanie Babies, and about the year in which Beanie Babies were created. And it's a dramatic movie. So, of course, there's a lot of other things going on. And in fact, what's funny about it is targets are set with the assumption of all kinds of other parameters, right? The idea of how far out can you set the goalpost. There is a lot of data to say that, for example, kickers, field goal kickers, regularly only make certain distances of field goals.
Yeah.
And so if you set it too far, the assumption is, well, nobody's ever done it, or the average is X. And therefore, if the target is set at Y and the average is X, how, is it even possible?
Right. Exactly.
And there's a couple of things to keep in mind there. One, sometimes you get an incredibly talented person and they can kick field goals like nobody else. And two, sometimes your company invents something like Beanie Babies. And you don't set a target for Beanie Baby years.
Yeah, you don't.
You set targets for motivation. There's an assumption that it's reasonable and inspirational and motivational. And for example, 20% growth would be great. And raises and bonuses would rain down on our people and it would be fantastic. And if nobody believes that 20% growth is possible, they wouldn't bother and we would never achieve it.
Yeah, exactly. There's a delicate balance there between achievable and still a stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, y'all, just as a heads up, I'm not fully recommending the Beanie Baby movie.
Yeah. Okay, good.
It's worth watching. I wouldn't approach it from the perspective of a business movie.
Okay.
It's like some business, some fluff.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I probably won't watch it.
Really? Did you watch like Air or the Blackberry?
I loved Air.
Okay, did you watch
Air.
Blackberry?
Oh, I don't know that I watched Blackberry. I did watch Air.
Blackberry is good.
Yeah?
I think
okay.
you would like it. So if there's like Air, and these movies are all kind of like, for me, they're kind of wrapped up in like The Big Short, like these kind of nonfiction-ish.
Ish.
Ish. The Beanie Baby movie is way on the ish end.
Okay, yeah, sure.
And I think you can tell that when you review the cast. And it's good. And there are some business themes.
Yeah,
okay.
It. Some business themes, I like it.
I think you would like the Blackberry movie.
Okay,
I found it very, very interesting.
Okay, so back to our train of thinking. Okay, so
yes.
Now, again, if you're going to set a goal that would allow for these fantastic raises and bonuses, but no one's going to believe it,
right?
They're going to be less likely to achieve it. Further, the organizational goals discussion includes an explicit calculation supported by reams of spreadsheets. If the goal is X, we're going to make Y, and Y is enough to fund raises and bonuses of Z. Your corporate targets are designed to incentivize meeting, but not necessarily exceeding them. In some ways, you can think of your organizational targets as having been engineered in order to meet the needs of both the company from the standpoint of capital and from growth, and the employees in terms of funding future compensation growth. So the amount of data that goes into the engineering, really, of corporate goals is so immense as to be a number that's essentially a calculation. And it's completely different for individual performance. Completely different. It's impossible for organizations to centrally determine the performance standards for every single job that exists within their organization. Now, they may try. They do try, but it's not possible. The organization knows, because it knows it can't possibly come up with performance standards for every single job, that the most significant criteria on job performance is not objective performance against a target, sales being a classic exception, but rather the manager's judgment regarding the employee's performance.
And there's a critical underlying force animating most performance management systems. What's worth discussing here, organizational targets are almost purely objective and publicly known. And while that's true, the organization knows that the average manager has not done their job throughout the year regarding performance communications. They know the average manager is probably averse to having tougher conversations with employees when they themselves know they haven't done their job. And the organization knows that if left to their own devices, which managers usually are during performance review writing season, they will use benefit of the doubt thinking liberally in their decision processes and overrate virtually everyone on their team, if for no other reason than to avoid any difficulties in the delivery of the review.
Exactly. So if organizations know that there will be performance inflation, and they do know there will be performance inflation, and it's a separate problem to solve for, the question then becomes, what are they going to do about it? Clearly, the organization can't countenance a culture of inflation combined with a measurement where exceeding and meeting job standards are both considered equally. If it did, a nightmare situation would occur that should not occur, but we all know full well would occur. Substandard performers would be considered to have met standards, and since met and exceeded are essentially the same thing from a future compensation perspective, now we have substandard performers getting exceeded standards compensation awards.
Dangerous.
Dangerous.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Hopefully this thought exercise and this explanation on our end will help you see why corporate and individual performance discriminators are driven differently. And some of you probably grasped that intrinsically or already understood it to be true and needed, just to kind of go down that rabbit hole with us. And frankly, we think it's a useful exercise in explanation and education for all of us. And, it wouldn't surprise me at all if this cast is really useful for managers to share with their directs.
Yeah.
Honestly, I can see if you're a manager and especially if you have a license, just sharing these show notes with your directs and saying, hey, nobody ever taught me this. And every single bit of education you can provide your directs about management, professionalism, these kind of systems that we exist in, gives them, I think, like this pedestal to stand on, to kind of raise them above the other people in the professional world. And I'm not trying to, that's not true. I was going to say, I'm not trying to give our audience the ability to stand above everybody. That's obviously not true. We've been trying to do that for
years.
A long
That's
time.
what we do.
Sure. Let me say it differently. That's not the reason that I want us to have a well-educated audience. The reason is because if you already know these things, your opportunity for learning other things and your capacity for learning other things to make you a more effective professional is higher. If you go into the workforce, if you go into your career, I'm thinking of someone now I know who's just, coming into their professional career. They're in their early 20s. If you started your career knowing these things,
oh my gosh, right?
Couldn't you
imagine where we'd be? Imagine.
Yeah, just think of the pedestal that you have that you're standing on.
Yeah.
And to some extent, part of the reason I believe that is because having worked with Mark and Mike since the very beginning, there were things that I took for granted knowing, that kind of like academic creep of becoming a manager, already knowing. I remember we used to have slides instead of show notes. Every podcast had a slide deck. And I remember creating those slide decks for one-on-ones for the Trinity at the very beginning. And then when I became a manager, those slides were in my brain.
Yeah.
Like that was already there. And imagine y'all sharing this with your directs early in their careers so that they know this and they're not baffled and they understand. And of course, somebody's probably thinking, well, they could use that to get a leg up. And to be frank with you, good.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, if nothing else, it decreases the concern that so often performance review season is abound with. There's so much fear because there's a lack of knowledge about what really this engagement, this conversation, this situation is about. You know what I mean? It's not even, it's remiss of a purpose, frankly.
That's it for today, y'all. We'll see you back here next week with the continuation of this topic.